Okay, so what on earth could a modern Hollywood A-lister possibly have in common with a 20th century Spanish dictator? Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're tackling a really unusual juxtaposition. We're going to dive into the careers, the controversies, and the lasting legacies of two completely different men who just happen to share a very famous surname, Franco. By looking at a modern Hollywood figure right alongside a military dictator, we're going to explore how power, influence, and the labels we apply to these figures fundamentally shape how they're remembered. It's going to be a fascinating ride.
So, here is our roadmap for today. We'll start with Part 1, A Tale of Two Francos. Then Part 2, James, Hollywood and Academia. Part 3, James, The Misconduct Allegations. Part 4, Francisco, Fascist or Francoist. And finally, Part 5, Defining the Spanish Dictator.
All right, kicking things off with Section 1, A Tale of Two Francos. One name, two worlds.
Look, we've got to address the elephant in the room right off the bat. We are intentionally combining two completely unrelated figures here to explore the dynamics of power. On one side, you have James Franco, American actor, filmmaker, and, honestly, an obsessive academic. On the other side, Francisco Franco, the 20th century Spanish generalissimo, who ruled Spain with an iron fist for decades. Acknowledging the irony of their shared name lets us cleanly split our explainer into two distinct tabs. We're examining how individuals build, consolidate, and wield influence in totally different domains. Think about how power actually operates. It's rarely just about the official title you hold. It's about how you command the room, or, an entire country.
Moving right along to Section 2, James, Hollywood and Academia, the prolific actor and student.
Just look at the sheer speed of this. We're talking about a guy building a massive, almost relentless academic portfolio while simultaneously standing at the absolute peak of Hollywood. While he was achieving worldwide fame in the Spider-Man franchise and pulling in an Oscar nomination for 127 Hours, where, fun fact, he literally read academic textbooks in a fake ravine between takes, he was quietly racking up university degrees. UCLA, Columbia, NYU, Yale, the Rhode Island School of Design. To do all of this at once requires an unbelievable amount of drive, but it also creates a very unique kind of cultural capital and authority. He actually pushed back pretty hard against the media narratives that his academic pursuits were just, celebrity stunts. He insisted, well, he claimed anyway, that he just wanted to go to school purely for the art and the education. But here's why this is absolutely crucial to our exploration of power. This intense drive transitioned from him taking classes to actually teaching them. He started leading film seminars at prestigious places like NYU, USC, and UCLA, and eventually opened his own acting school, Studio 4. By doing that, he successfully blended his A-list celebrity status with the undeniable authority of an academic mentor. He held immense influence over his students who were, naturally, desperate to break into the very industry he dominated.
Which brings us to Section 3, James, The Misconduct Allegations, covering the lawsuits and settlements.
In 2018, the narrative around those classrooms took a really dark turn. Former students came forward alleging they were pressured into exploitative situations while he served as their teacher and mentor. The resulting lawsuits claimed that the Studio 4 program basically sought to create a pipeline of young women who were subjected to sexual exploitation, all under the guise of an edgy, avant-garde education. Students were allegedly encouraged to audition nude and engage in simulated sex acts that went far, far beyond standard industry practices. The power imbalance here is stark, right? You have a famous mentor literally holding the keys to Hollywood over completely unestablished, aspiring students.
Now, these accusations didn't just pop up out of nowhere. They formed a clear, escalating timeline. Back in 2014, he admitted to messaging a 17-year-old girl on Instagram, trying to meet her at a hotel, a situation that really highlights the gravity of massive power imbalances. Then, skipping ahead to 2019, the formal lawsuit was filed by his former Studio 4 students, and all of this eventually culminated in a 2021 podcast interview. During that conversation, he publicly admitted to sleeping with his students and revealed he'd been undergoing treatment for sex addiction since 2016.
And these allegations didn't just fade into the Hollywood ether, they resulted in massive, tangible legal consequences. In 2021, an agreement was reached to pay over $2.2 million to settle the claims. This included resolving the sexual exploitation claims brought by two specific women, alongside a much larger class action fraud case involving roughly 1,500 Studio 4 students. It is a staggering contrast to the high-flying academic and acting achievements we were just talking about, right? It really showcases how unchecked power within an educational setting ultimately collapsed under legal and public scrutiny.
Okay, hard pivot here for section 4. Fascist or Francoist? We are shifting the lens to 20th century Spain.
So we're stepping entirely out of modern Hollywood now to look at our second subject, Francisco Franco, diving deep into the complex geopolitical history of 1930s to 1970s Spain. Now, while he was heavily backed by Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy during the brutal Spanish Civil War, many historians argue his actual ideology was distinct from his allies. It was a concept known as Francoism. This wasn't about forging some radical New World order, it was about intense Spanish nationalism, reactionary Catholicism, and meticulously restoring the traditional power of the church and the military. Essentially, he was trying to wind the clock back to the power structures of the 1800s.
There's actually a massive distinction between the two systems. True fascism, like Mussolini's or Hitler's, was inherently revolutionary. It relied on popular, radical mass movements. Think of the black shirts or brown shirts mobilizing in the streets. Francoism, however, was stubbornly traditionalist and reactionary. Francisco Franco was, above all else, a pragmatist and a survivor. He actively marginalized Spain's actual radical fascists, the Falange Party, forcibly folding them into his own organization to guarantee they could never ever challenge his absolute authority.
You can really see this intense pragmatism when you look at his economic maneuvers. Initially, the regime pursued autarky, which is a strictly independent, self-reliant economy meant to mirror fascist Germany. But when that model catastrophically failed to rebuild Spain, he didn't cling to it out of some sense of ideological purity. No, he completely abandoned it. The resulting 1959 Spanish miracle saw him open the country to massive foreign investment and free market capitalism, heavily aided by the Americans. This wasn't about holding true to a specific ideology, it was about doing whatever it took to keep an iron grip on power and survive the Cold War era.
Finally, we arrive at section 5, defining the Spanish dictator and the historiographical debate. So, how do the history books actually categorize this guy today? The debate among academics is fierce and deeply divided. Historians utilizing a Marxist framework often use a really broad definition. Any authoritarian defending traditional, elite hierarchies from the radical left is classified as a fascist. Conversely, modern scholars like Robert Paxton argue that Franco fundamentally lacked the revolutionary radicalism required of true fascism. There is even a noted ongoing clash between left-wing historians and right-wing Spanish historians, which just goes to show you how politically charged this history remains even decades later.
So, if he wasn't strictly a fascist, what exactly was he? Well, modern historians suggest Francisco Franco is best understood as the highly pragmatic leader of a broad, right-wing, big tent coalition. It's like a giant balancing act. He managed to unite an incredibly diverse and contradictory group: actual fascists, traditional Carlists, royalists, big business elites, the military establishment, and the Catholic Church. Their primary unifying factor wasn't a shared vision of a fascist utopia, it was their mutual desperate opposition to the left-wing Spanish Republic. He played these factions against each other brilliantly, just to remain the indispensable man at the top.
One of the most striking perspectives from our research points out that simplifying the Spanish Civil War as just fascism versus socialism completely ignores the deep historical complexities at play. It was fundamentally a brutal conflict between radical reform and a desperate attempt to preserve the status quo, with millions of everyday people caught right in the middle of the devastating crossfire. The regime didn't survive for nearly 40 years through ideological zeal, but through the ruthless, calculating management of those competing interests.
To cap off this explainer, consider this for a moment. Whether it's an A-list actor leveraging his fame and academic credentials to wield absolute power over aspiring students in a Hollywood classroom, or a generalissimo using the military and sheer political pragmatism to hold absolute power over an entire European nation, the labels we apply matter. Artist, abuser, fascist, pragmatist, these words completely shape our understanding of history, influence, and ultimate accountability. Why does this matter to us today? Because power dynamics exist everywhere, from the classroom to the world stage, and recognizing how they are built is the very first step in understanding them. So how will you remember the tale of the two Francos? Thanks so much for joining me today, and keep asking the hard questions.